Welcome back, powerful people, to your Go to Pan-African voice. If you're new here, welcome. This is where Africa speaks boldly, unapologetically, and on its own terms. You're watching a platform that centers African stories, African truths, and African perspectives. If you value real conversations that challenge the status quo, hit that like button, share this video with your circle, and don't forget to subscribe and tap the notification bell so you never miss when we go live. You can now support this platform directly through YouTube's Super Thanks feature. It goes a long way in helping us amplify our reach and keep producing content that matters. And as always, we love hearing from you. Drop a respectful and thoughtful comment below. Let's build this community together. Disclaimer: the following content is for educational and informational purposes only. Everything presented is grounded in publicly available sources, commentary, and complies with YouTube's community guidelines. No misinformation, no hidden agendas, just real talk. The spotlight is back on General Michael Langley, yes, that General Langley, who's landed in Kenya for the high-profile African Chiefs of Defense Conference. His name still echoes across West Africa, especially in Burkina Faso, where his recent remarks have left a bitter taste. You'll remember he stirred serious outrage after accusing Burkina Faso's president, Ibrahim Traore, of misusing the country's gold reserves for personal benefit. That allegation ignited mass protests, with people flooding the streets chanting, "Hands off Traoré! Hands off Burkina Faso!" The backlash was fierce and loud. General Langley has since tried to clarify his words, claiming they were taken out of context. But across much of the continent, the message remains, stay out of African affairs. Today, we're diving deep into what Langley is really doing here, and what AFRICOM's role on this continent actually is. But first, let's pause. Let us know in the comments where you're watching this from. It helps us connect with our audience across the globe. Now, brace yourself for this. One of the soldiers trained under US military programs led the coup in Guinea and is now its head of state. That's right. General Langley was grilled in a US congressional hearing about how many African soldiers have been trained and equipped by the US military. When asked how many of those soldiers ended up staging coups, he stumbled, fumbling for numbers, guessing, and dodging specifics. But here's the part that matters. A photo was shown. Colonel Mamadi Doumbouya, standing shoulder to shoulder with US soldiers outside the US embassy in Guinea, just months before he overthrew his country's president. Langley couldn't confirm if Doumbouya was trained by the US, even though the image said more than words ever could. So what are we really dealing with? AFRICOM says it's here to build African capacity, support peacekeeping, and strengthen regional security. But if soldiers they train are turning around and toppling governments, we have to ask, what's really going on behind the scenes? At this point, it's impossible to ignore the whispers. Are these programs designed for peace or for strategic control? AFRICOM doesn't even include US in its branding. But to avoid drawing attention to its true origin and interests, it's marketed as an African initiative, but make no mistake, this is the United States Africa Command. And let's not be naive. The US isn't here out of pure goodwill. They're protecting strategic interests, access to natural resources, military positioning, and influence over geopolitical outcomes. Langley's remarks about Burkina Faso's gold? They weren't just casual observations. They were red flags. And it's not just about Guinea or Burkina Faso. If these military training programs are breeding coups and instability, how many more nations are at risk? How many more leaders will be undermined by partners supposedly there to help? Langley's energy when accusing Traoré was aggressive, pointed, and confident. But when asked to account for the US role in African coups, he suddenly had no data, no numbers, no answers, just vague commitments to core values. Really? Core values? This isn't just incompetence, it's calculated ambiguity. Because if a program trains 50,000 African soldiers, even a small 1% involved in coups amounts to hundreds of soldiers influencing government takeovers. That's not a glitch in the system. That is the system. And when footage surfaces showing US troops smiling and celebrating in Guinea just after the coup, you have to question everything. Who's really pulling the strings? They say coups aren't spontaneous. They require planning, weapons, intelligence, and infrastructure. If AFRICOM is on the ground, training these soldiers, how could they not know what was coming? Or did they know all along? Let that sink in. And if you're still with us, pause for a second, like this video, share it, and help us keep these conversations alive. Because these are the stories many are afraid to tell. The truth is, Africa must rise to train its own defenders. Relying on outsiders gives them power not just over our soldiers, but over our futures. AFRICOM's reach spans across the continent, with strategic bases and covert operations, not just in Guinea, but also Niger, Somalia, Libya, and beyond. And yet, when crises erupt, when civilians die, when governments fall, the finger never points toward the shadow network behind the training, funding, and intelligence. We are told it's all coincidence. But how many coincidences does it take before it becomes a pattern? We'll keep digging, but the question remains: are these partnerships really for Africa, or for those who profit from its chaos? Let us know what you think in the comments. Should African nations continue hosting AFRICOM and its training programs? Should we be having deeper conversations about what true sovereignty looks like in this century? As General Langley continues to make rounds across African capitals, one location seems to be a favorite: Kenya. While he hasn't been spotted in Uganda, Tanzania, or many other neighboring nations, his visits to Nairobi have been frequent and strategic. Which begs the question: why Kenya? Is Kenya simply hosting high-level defense dialogues? Or is something more layered unfolding beneath the surface? During his visit, Langley met with key figures in Kenya's military and political leadership, posing for photos with senior government officials, including the former deputy president and the late General Francis Ogolla. Curiously, some of these meetings occurred just days before Ogolla's untimely death. Now, no direct connections have been established, but in a continent rife with shadow diplomacy and backroom deals, it's understandable that speculation would swirl. And while AFRICOM sells itself as a defender of regional security, there's a critical gap in transparency. Many of their operations remain classified under national security pretexts, even within host countries. Take, for instance, the 2017 Niger ambush, where 4 US soldiers and 5 Nigerian troops were killed. It shocked the world, not just for the tragedy, but for the revelation that US troops were even operating there. That moment exposed something crucial: a wide network of secret operations, drone bases, and military influence that most Africans didn't even know existed. Drone bases have been identified in Niger, Somalia, and Libya, and AFRICOM provided logistics and intelligence during NATO's bombing campaign in Libya in 2011. Yes, that same campaign that destabilized the country and led to the fall of Muammar Gaddafi. Still believe they're here just to hand out humanitarian aid? Let's talk about influence. Because Langley's criticism of Ibrahim Traore wasn't just a passing comment, it was a political message, an attempt to delegitimize a leader who has openly rejected Western dominance in West Africa. Langley claimed his remarks were from a military perspective. But when a top-ranking American general publicly accuses an African head of state of corruption without evidence, that's not commentary, it's sabotage. Imagine the reverse. Picture an African general going to Washington, D.C., and declaring that a U.S. president is stealing gold from American reserves for personal gain. The outrage would be immediate. So, what makes it acceptable when it's done to African leaders? The damage of such remarks, had they gone unchallenged, could have undermined Traoré's credibility and authority. Fortunately, the people of Burkina Faso rose in defense of their president. And their voices, like many others across Africa, made it clear: the age of foreign dictate is over. Let that be a message to all global powers. You can no longer talk about Africa without hearing back from Africa. To every viewer tuned in from across the continent and beyond, your voice matters. Leave a comment below. Should the African Union take a more assertive stance against foreign military structures on the continent? Should we redefine our security collaborations on our own terms? And speaking of voices, a powerful statement from an African American woman resonated deeply with many. She stood firmly behind Traoré and denounced Langley's remarks, making it clear that African Americans do not support the destabilization of African nations. She emphasized that most Americans don't even know who Michael Langley is, and those who do not endorse his actions. This sentiment was echoed by many others. Some expressed anger at seeing a black man used as a tool to undermine another black man in Africa, a tactic, they say, often used to maintain plausible deniability while advancing imperialist agendas. One commenter put it bluntly: the American dream is for Americans. Africa has never been part of that equation. Another asked, if Africa is as unstable and undesirable as they claim, why does it continue to attract so much foreign military interest? These are not conspiracy theories. These are reflections of lived history, of foreign interventions cloaked in security partnerships, of resource extraction masked as development aid, of leadership delegitimized not by their people, but by foreign powers who fear their independence. And maybe that's the deeper issue here. When African nations begin to assert their sovereignty, when they start saying no to old patterns of dependence and control, it threatens a global structure built on exploitation. AFRICOM, for many, is a symbol of that structure. So again, ask yourself, who benefits from AFRICOM's presence? Is it the African people? Or is it those who've always benefited from Africa's instability? As this awakening continues to ripple across the continent, it's not just a military issue, it's a generational one. The youth are rising. The consciousness is shifting. Africa is no longer asking for a seat at the table. It's building its own. If this resonates with you, don't just watch, be part of the movement. Subscribe, like, and share this video. Let your network hear these conversations that the mainstream won't touch. We're not done yet. Stay with us. And as we continue peeling back the layers, let's not ignore the double standard that AFRICOM and its representatives represent. When Langley is grilled on how many US-trained African soldiers have gone on to lead coups, he suddenly finds himself without numbers, without data, without answers. But when it's time to condemn President Traoré, he seems remarkably sure of his position. Convenient, isn't it? This hypocrisy is not accidental, it's structural. We need to be real here. You cannot train tens of thousands of African troops, inject military doctrines, weapons, and tactics into local security forces, and then claim innocence when coups erupt. That's not just oversight, that's complicity. And it raises an even bigger question. Why is Africa still outsourcing its military development? With all the talent, expertise, and potential on this continent, why is it acceptable, decade after decade, for foreign powers to dominate the training and doctrine of African soldiers? Because let's be clear, when someone trains your army, they don't just teach combat. They shape loyalty, influence ideology, and embed their interests into your national security apparatus. At what cost? It's time for the continent to ask, when will we take back full control over how our soldiers are educated, deployed, and commanded? When will we finally build institutions that are by Africans, for Africans? We are at a crossroads. Either we continue to rely on external powers who never truly act in our interest, or we invest in our own systems, our own sovereignty, and our own future. Let's also talk about language and branding, because even that is a battlefield. AFRICOM sounds inclusive. It sounds African, but it's not. It is a United States military command structure with its headquarters in Germany, not Accra, Nairobi, or Addis Ababa. So why the name? Because optics matter. If they called it what it really is, United States Africa Command, then the veil would fall. People would connect the dots. They would ask questions like, why are US troops deployed across African soil? Why are drone bases operating in places like Niger and Somalia with little to no public accountability? Why is it that Africa, a continent rich with natural and human resources, still remains the geopolitical chessboard for external players? And perhaps the most piercing question of them all, whose interests are being protected when African sovereignty is sidelined? In recent years, resistance has been growing. Countries like Mali, Burkina Faso, and Guinea have started charting their own course, rejecting the influence of Western military and economic models. This hasn't come without backlash, but it has reignited something powerful: Pan-African unity. This is the moment to act, to stand firm, to understand that Africa's future depends on how we confront these structures today. And let's not forget the voices of the people, the real pulse of the continent. One African-American woman captured the sentiment beautifully. Speaking directly to African audiences, she made it clear, Black Americans are not represented by people like Langley. His statements, his presence, and his criticisms do not speak for the diaspora. Most African Americans, she said, are either unaware of him or don't support what he stands for. Her message was simple but profound. We have our own problems in America. Don't think we endorse those sent to undermine Black leadership abroad. It struck a chord because it reminded us that not all Black faces serve Black liberation. Sometimes, they are strategically placed to lend credibility to systems designed to silence and control us. This is not a narrative of hate. It's a call to clarity. As more African youth become politically conscious, as digital spaces like this one bring suppressed truths to light, the game is changing. No longer will African narratives be written by foreign generals, pundits, or puppet institutions. It is our duty, yours, mine, and every viewer tuned in, to keep asking questions. To dig beneath the surface. To challenge anyone who speaks on Africa without being of Africa or standing with Africa. And if you believe in this mission, If you're tired of the silence, the spin, and the manipulation, subscribe now, like this video, and share it with 5 people you know need to hear this. This is how we rewrite the script. This is how we reclaim the story. Let us know, should African governments be negotiating the presence of AFRICOM more transparently? Do you believe foreign military actors should have a role in domestic security at all? As we continue unraveling this web, it's crucial to look at the consequences of silence. The high price Africa pays when leaders prioritize foreign validation over local accountability. What happens when leaders allow military infrastructure to be built without parliamentary oversight, without civilian transparency, and without a long-term vision rooted in African interests? We're seeing it now. Entire regions militarized under the guise of counterterrorism. Airstrips expanded. Drone bases established. Intelligence networks activated. And all of it happening with minimal public scrutiny. When events like the Niger ambush of 2017 shocked the world, we realized too late that operations were already underway, in secret and often without the consent of the people. And that's just what's public. The deeper concern is how these foreign alliances subvert democracy itself. When soldiers trained under AFRICOM turn their weapons not on terrorists, but on their own governments, it exposes a fault line. This isn't about training. This is about who has control over the soul of a nation's armed forces. Ask yourself, if the ultimate loyalty of a soldier lies with a foreign instructor, foreign funding, or foreign ideology, then who do they serve? Is it their flag or someone else's? The danger of this model is not hypothetical, it's playing out in real time. And that's why we must stop treating AFRICOM as a benign presence. It's not just a logistics hub. It's not just a training center. It's a geopolitical weapon, one that can shape outcomes in African countries without firing a single shot. And this leads us to something even more chilling: celebration as a strategy. In Guinea, after the coup, we saw images: American soldiers in the streets, clapping with civilians, smiling in the moment of power transition. If they were truly surprised by the coup, what were they celebrating? This isn't just about who holds the gun. It's about who writes the narrative. They say they're here to help. But when African leaders chart independent paths, nationalizing resources, rejecting Western debt traps, and promoting homegrown governance, they're immediately cast as dangerous, corrupt, or illegitimate. Traoré, like others before him, is walking that tightrope now. He's not flawless. No leader is. But the speed and aggression with which external voices moved to discredit him says more about their fear than his failure. And the people? They've had enough. From Ouagadougou to Bamako, from Conakry to Nairobi, Africans are rising. Not with blind nationalism, but with a newfound clarity. The kind that asks, why is a US general speaking louder about African gold than African leaders are? Why are we still waiting for someone else to secure our borders, train our armies, and write our security doctrines? Let me ask you now, do you think African leaders should ban all foreign military training programs until they can be fully monitored and controlled by African oversight? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And while you're at it, hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. These are the conversations we need to amplify, far beyond borders and algorithms. Remember, the issue is not Langley the man, it's the system he represents. A system that thrives in shadows, that wears friendly uniforms but holds colonial blueprints, that promises protection while positioning for profit. And even more worrying is the trend. Whenever resistance grows in West Africa, the foreign powers pivot toward East Africa. That's why Langley is in Kenya. That's why these conferences, photo ops, and press releases are happening now. West Africa is rejecting them. So now they're coming east. And while some leaders might be seduced by the optics of American cooperation, the people are watching, and the people are remembering. History doesn't forget. So to the youth of Africa, the policy thinkers, the educators, the everyday people, this is your moment. Don't wait for permission to reclaim your future. You don't need it. You just need truth. You just need courage. And you need unity. Let us know in the comments, is Africa finally waking up for good? Or will we continue to allow ourselves to be used, our resources drained, our leaders undermined, and our futures auctioned off? And as we press forward, the question becomes even more urgent. What kind of Africa are we willing to fight for? One where our defense is dictated from foreign command centers? Or one where we define what sovereignty, security, and dignity mean for ourselves? Because if we're not shaping that future, someone else will. Let's not forget what AFRICOM truly represents. It's not just about countering terrorism or promoting regional stability. It's part of a much larger system, one that sees Africa not as a continent of people, cultures, and dreams, but as a strategic asset, a continent to be monitored, managed, and mined. That's why when General Langley speaks about cautionary tales and core values, we must ask, whose values? Whose caution? Is it caution for the people of Africa? Or caution for losing control over Africa's resources? Let's be clear, when foreign generals criticize African leaders for how they use their own gold, that's not accountability, it's interference. And when those same generals fall silent on US-trained soldiers staging coups, that silence is deafening. But maybe they've miscalculated. Maybe they thought Africans would stay quiet, would accept this theater of partnerships and humanitarianism while their countries were being slowly militarized. Maybe they didn't expect that this generation would have access to the truth, that we'd connect across borders, languages, and platforms to say, enough. We are no longer in the age of passive recipients. We are in the age of active resistance, not with weapons, but with awareness, with questions, with truth-telling, with Pan-African unity. And we must be brave enough to challenge even our own. Because complicity doesn't only come in uniforms. It wears suits, sits in parliaments, signs away sovereign rights in backdoor deals, and smiles for the camera while doing it. We have leaders today, yes, in Africa, who are still addicted to the colonial playbook. Leaders who believe development only comes when foreign troops are stationed on our soil. Leaders who sell military access in exchange for aid packages and diplomatic favors. That era must end. So again, let me speak directly to you, the one watching this from Accra or Addis or Atlanta. The one listening in Nairobi, Lagos, or Johannesburg. You are not powerless. In fact, you are the very person AFRICOM does not want informed. Because once you're informed, you're dangerous to their narrative. That's why we must speak louder, share further, ask deeper, challenge harder. Drop a comment below. What do you believe should be the role of African citizens in holding their leaders accountable for military alliances? How can we create defense systems rooted in African ethics, African interests, and African unity? Because the truth is, Africa cannot afford borrowed strength. We need to build our own. From our academies to our training grounds, from our border patrols to our command centers, we must own every link in the chain. Only then can we guarantee that our soldiers defend the people, not the profits of foreign powers. And to those watching in power, understand this. Your people are watching too. Every handshake, every deal, every training session signed under foreign influence. It's being recorded in the collective memory of a rising generation that won't be fooled twice. Africa will no longer be the playground of empires. We are not chess pieces. We are the players. So to everyone watching, like this video, share it widely, and don't just scroll past this message. Engage. Mobilize. Because one thing is clear, if we want a different Africa, we'll have to build it ourselves. And the building begins right here, right now. And let's keep pulling that thread, because the deeper we go, the more we see the same patterns repeating, coded in different language, wrapped in diplomatic smiles, but rooted in the same extractive logic. When General Langley talks about supporting African security and peacekeeping, we have to ask, who defines peace? Because in this framework, peace often looks like compliance. Compliance with Western interests, with mineral contracts, with foreign bases, with narratives that justify constant presence. But Africa is entering a new season, one where peace will be defined not by how quiet we are, but by how sovereign we become. One where stability means strong, independent nations, not fragile governments held up by aid and guarded by foreign-trained forces. And this shift is unsettling to the old order. That's why, when countries like Burkina Faso, Mali, and Guinea say no to old partnerships and military arrangements, the backlash is immediate. Suddenly, they're painted as unstable, dangerous, or under foreign, read, Russian or Chinese, influence. But when African nations operate under Western influence, we're told it's strategic partnership. Again, double standards. If you haven't already, hit that like button and share this video with someone who still believes foreign boots on African soil are the path to development. Let them hear the facts. Let them see the pattern. Let them ask the questions they've been trained not to ask. And while we're talking patterns, let's talk about language manipulation. Every time there's a coup where a US-trained soldier takes power, the official response is predictable. We were caught off guard. He acted on his own. It's unfortunate but rare. It's never, we created the conditions. It's never, this is part of a flawed strategy. Always deflect. Always deny. And yet, with each new coup, the dots connect themselves. These aren't isolated incidents. They're the byproducts of a model that was never meant to empower Africa, only to monitor and manage it. This is why public consciousness is a threat to these systems. Because when the people start connecting these dots, they begin to realize that training isn't just about military skills. It's about shaping loyalties, creating dependencies, and embedding surveillance. Let me ask you something. What does it say about African sovereignty when foreign generals can tour our capitals more freely than our own grassroots leaders? When our budgets prioritize hosting foreign military delegations over building indigenous command structures? Let's call it what it is: military outsourcing at the cost of national dignity. But that tide is turning. We are witnessing the birth of a new political imagination, one where the next generation of Africans sees clearly through the smokescreen of security partnerships. Where youth in the streets of Ouagadougou, the campuses of Nairobi, and the rural heartlands of Bamako no longer accept that safety comes from outside. Safety comes from unity, from knowledge, from purpose. That's why platforms like this exist, not to tell you what to think, but to remind you that you have the right to think for yourself, to question everything, to demand answers, to refuse scripted futures written in embassies and military outposts. So again, take a moment and comment below. What steps should African nations take to create regional military academies that reduce dependency on external forces? Could an African defense pact, built and led by Africans, be the key to real security? Because let's be honest, as long as we rely on the same powers that destabilized us to now secure us, we will never know true peace. As long as our borders are protected by those who once drew them, we will never know true unity. This is the inconvenient truth. But truth is power, and the more it spreads, the harder it becomes to suppress. So wherever you are watching from, whether it's Dakar, Lusaka, or the diaspora in London and Atlanta, understand this: the movement to reclaim Africa is global. It's not bound by borders or languages. It's bound by purpose. And our purpose is clear: to expose, to educate, to empower. And as we go even deeper, we begin to understand just how entrenched the system is, not only through military partnerships, but also through media narratives, economic leverage, and diplomatic theater. Every mechanism is designed to reinforce a single message: you need us. But here's the truth that's beginning to rattle the walls of that lie: we don't. We don't need AFRICOM to tell us how to protect our homes. We don't need foreign aid wrapped in military contracts to build resilience. And we certainly don't need foreign generals standing in African capitals preaching about governance, resource management, or morality. Because the real scandal is not just in what they're doing, it's in how long we've tolerated it. For decades, African elites, presidents, ministers, commanders, have opened the doors to these so-called partners, often for personal gain or to shore up fragile regimes. And every time, the result has been the same: increased dependency, decreased sovereignty, and a population left in the dark. Until now. Now, the people are not just listening. They're watching, recording, exposing, resisting. And no amount of glossy public relations from AFRICOM or the Pentagon will erase that reality. Because the internet doesn't forget. Footage of coups doesn't vanish. And the testimonies of those who've lived through foreign-engineered instability are etched into the soul of the continent. Let's not ignore that Kenya, where Langley is now strengthening ties, is quickly becoming a regional nerve center for US operations. The same way West Africa became a frontier for counterterrorism, East Africa is now being quietly positioned as a staging ground for influence. But because West Africa said no, because Burkina Faso, Mali, and Guinea have rejected the narrative. They've closed the doors, demanded accountability, and looked inward for strength. And that, to imperial interests, is dangerous. It threatens the illusion of control. So, the pivot is on. Langley knows what he's doing. So do the diplomats and defense contractors shadowing these visits. Their strategy is long-term, calculated, and cloaked in the language of partnership. But underneath it all lies the same goal that's been there for centuries: control the land, control the resources, control the people. And this is why your awareness, your conscious participation, is everything. Every time you share a video like this, challenge the mainstream story, or organize a conversation in your community, you are disrupting that control. You are declaring that the African mind is no longer for rent. So ask yourself, what are we doing with this awakening? Are we building African-led defense colleges? Are we revisiting military treaties and demanding they be made public? Are we pressuring our parliaments to scrutinize foreign bases on our soil? Are we amplifying the voices of whistleblowers, academics, and activists who've been calling this out for years? Or are we still clapping at press conferences where foreign generals shake hands with our presidents while our minerals get signed away in the back room? Because let's be real, this is not just a military issue. This is about the very foundation of African self-determination. Who we train, who we arm, who we trust to protect us, these are questions that will define the next 50 years. If we don't answer them, someone else will. And that someone else has never had our best interests at heart. Let me ask you again, should Africa develop its own continental defense force outside of foreign influence? What would it take to build a united African military doctrine that respects cultural sovereignty, prioritizes people over power, and serves as a true shield, not just for governments, but for citizens? Tell us in the comments. Because that's the kind of conversation that shifts paradigms, that challenges power, that builds legacy. And remember, every view, every comment, every share is a step closer to decolonizing not just our politics, but our perception. So if this message resonates with you, don't just consume it, amplify it. Share it with your WhatsApp groups, your Telegram threads, your church, your school, your union. Let it echo where the noise of empire tries to drown out our truth. We've been quiet too long, but now the silence is over. So here we are. Another general comes and goes. Another handshake. Another speech. Another photo op meant to reassure us that everything is fine. But it's not fine. Because what's at stake here isn't just politics. It's not just about borders or military bases. It's about the soul of a continent. It's about the right of African nations to stand tall, to speak loudly, and to act boldly, without being policed, monitored, or manipulated by forces that have never truly cared for us. This isn't just a story about AFRICOM or General Langley. This is a mirror held up to all of us. What kind of Africa do we want to leave behind for our children? For the next generation of dreamers, builders, leaders? Will they inherit a continent still being told what to do and how to do it? Or will they inherit a continent that stood up, unshaken, and said, "We will define our own future. We are no one's shadow"? If these words stir something in you, it's because you already know. Deep inside, you know that the future of Africa cannot be negotiated by outsiders. It will be written by us, or it will be taken from us. This is not the time for silence. This is not the time for passivity. This is the time to rise, to unite, and to reclaim the narrative. So please, subscribe to this channel not just for content, but because this platform is part of something bigger. Like this video to push the message through the algorithm. Share it with your friends, your family, your networks. Let it become a spark in the minds of those still on the edge of awakening. And if you believe in the power of truth, in African sovereignty, in this movement for liberation, use the Super Thanks feature to support our voice. Your contribution helps us stay independent, keep digging, and keep telling the stories others won't. You are not just a viewer. You are part of this movement. You are part of this wave of consciousness that is sweeping across the continent and the diaspora. The drums are beating. Africa is rising. And history will remember those who stood up when it mattered most. We thank you. We see you. And we walk this path together. Until next time, stay woke, stay bold, stay African.